Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Rumburg, Managing Partner of MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on developing successful RFPs, requests for proposal. For those of you who were on the webcast last month, this is the second in a series of 4 webcasts we will be delivering in the first part of 2026 regarding outsourcing and specifically how to ensure a successful outsourcing relationship. Whether you're outsourcing a service desk, your desktop support, your field services, or your contact center, the principles, the data, and the benchmarks that we present will enable you to successfully outsource any one or all of these functions. Now, a lot of you I know, many of you I've met, some of you I've worked with, some of you I have served on boards of directors with, some of you I've authored papers with, but I don't know all of you. So I want to give you just a little bit of my background. I'm the founding partner of MetricNet. I was honored to receive the Ron Munn's Lifetime Achievement Award from HDI, and I was recently inducted into the HDI Thought Leaders Hall of Fame after having been recognized as one of the top 25 thought leaders for many years in a row. I've spoken at virtually every annual HDI conference. I'm an author of a book on benchmarking, and I launched the first benchmarking product in the service desk industry. It was called the Help Desk Benchmarking Consortium. That was more than 30 years ago. Formerly, I worked at Gartner. I was a VP of their benchmarking practice. I've published more than 100 white papers. That's how many of you know me, is from the white papers that I've written on service desk, contact center, desktop support, and field services. And I've been honored to work with more than half of the global 2,000, the largest 2,000 corporations worldwide. I wrote the metrics course for HDI and ICMI. Formerly, I was the instructor for those 2 courses, and I'm routinely brought in by large corporations to speak on the topic of customer care, whether it's technical support or non-technical support. So that's a bit of my background. Now, as we get into our webcast, I think it's important to point out a couple of things. One is that we have a PDF of today's presentation that you can download by clicking the attachments button. We also have some other materials there that you can download. And in a moment, I'm going to share a link with you that will take you to a series of white papers that I wrote on successful outsourcing. So please take advantage of these materials that we've put in the attachments section of today's webcast. At the conclusion of the webcast, roughly 40 minutes from now, we'd like your feedback, so please let us know what you think of the webcast, even if you just give us a score. But if you'd like to provide some additional commentary, we would appreciate that as well. We're always interested in hearing what you think about the content that we produce and deliver. It's worth noting right up front that everything we present in these webcasts is empirical in nature. The nature of empiricism is that it is based on data, it is based on observation. There's no speculation. There's no theoretical component to what I'm presenting. There's nothing academic about it. Everything I present today is based upon more than 500 outsourcing engagements we have been involved with. Some of these are for customers who hire MSPs, managed service providers. That is the clients of the MSPs, the clients of the outsourcers. Sometimes we work on the MSP side. We work with outsourcers in the pursuit of new opportunities. So we work on both sides of the equation. We're not biased either way. What we are looking for when we work with a client in a sourcing initiative or an outsourcer in the pursuit of new business, our goal is to get to a win-win for both the outsourcer and the client. A win-win is one where both parties are satisfied with the relationship and both parties feel that they are getting good value. The outsourcer feels that they are compensated fairly and treated fairly, and the client feels that the outsourcer is delivering on their contractual obligations and they are satisfied with the relationship they have with that contractor. We have a global database for benchmarking. It covers contact center, service desk, desktop support, and field services. This benchmarking database includes an outsourcing contracts library. It's the only one I'm aware of. Of course, individual outsourcers are going to have their own outsourcing templates that they use when they're pursuing new business. Some corporations have outsourcing templates, but MetricNet is the only organization I am aware of that actually has a comprehensive outsourcing contracts library. This is very useful for us because we know what works and what doesn't work, and we have been able to pick and choose the best components of the best contracts to create templates that ensure contracts that work for both the outsourcer and the clients of the outsourcers. Likewise, we have an RFP contracts library. This is specific to today's webcast. RFP, as you know, stands for Request for Proposal. Some organizations issue them as RFIs, Requests for Information. But we also have a comprehensive library of RFIs and RFPs. And once again, we pick and choose from the best of those to create templates for our clients that save them a lot of time and money, but more importantly, enable them to issue RFPs and RFIs that are succinct, to the point, consistent with industry best practices, and elicit the best possible responses from the outsourcers that are invited to participate in a contract pursuit opportunity. I'm going to review a couple of things that I covered in last month's webcast. This won't take more than a couple of minutes, but I just want to make sure that there is continuity between what I presented last month and what I'm presenting today. And some of the key motivators we see for outsourcing are cost reduction, quality improvement, improving and optimizing the customer experience, adopting and maturing AI, staying ahead of the technology curve, adopting industry best practices, maturing key processes. It could mean idle, but it means a lot more than idle. Idle does not cover every process, not even close. Whether you're a contact center, service desk, or desktop support, idle is just a framework that covers things like problem, incident, and knowledge management. It's actually 36 separate processes there, but processes go beyond idle. I want to be clear about that. And continuous improvement. These are some of the primary motivators that we hear day in and day out from our clients that are looking to retain an outsourcer or to recompete an existing contract. So these are not necessarily first-time corporations that want to outsource. Many of them are recompeting an existing contract, or in some cases, they're trying to rehabilitate an existing contract. The vendor is out of compliance, the client is not happy, and they're trying to rehabilitate that business relationship. So these are among the most common motivators, and each of them comes with an underlying premise or premises, if you will. The idea being that if you're after cost reduction, you think that an outsourcer can deliver that. If you're after improved quality, you think that the outsourcer can deliver that, and so on. But these are among the key motivators for outsourcing. Now, it's a kind of a hard truth, unfortunately, that most outsourcing relationships are dysfunctional at best, and in many cases, they're outright ineffective, and in some cases, hostile. Meaning that neither side feels like they're getting what they need. Neither the outsourcer nor the client feel like they're getting what they need. There's finger pointing, there's acrimony, there's arguments. It's an unfortunate situation that happens all too often. In fact, by our estimate, but based on benchmarking data, win-win, where both sides are satisfied, both the client and the outsourcer are satisfied, that happens only about 5% of the time. So it is unfortunate that this is the state of outsourcing. And I'm speaking not just of North America, but worldwide. We do business in Europe, in Latin America, in Asia Pac, as well as Southeast Asia. And this statistic holds pretty true regardless of where you are geographically. Now, there's a lot of reasons why so few outsourcing relationships do work out and why so few of them are what we would consider a win-win. I won't go through this list, but what I will say is that these are among the most common reasons we hear when a client is dissatisfied with their outsourcer. I've written an entire series of articles on this. So if you're interested in taking a deep dive on any one of these 11 major failure modes, you're welcome to do that. Now, I'm not trying to be all gloom and doom here, but what I am trying to do is inject some reality into this discussion so that you know ahead of time if you're thinking about outsourcing, or if you've already outsourced, or you're considering recompeting an existing contract, you're entering a dangerous territory, for lack of a better description, because the statistics show that most of these relationships don't work out very well. So if you're interested, you can hit this link here, metricnet.com / all the other stuff that follows that. You can find this 11-part series that I wrote on the problem with outsourcing and how to fix it. Once again, on the prior page, these are the most common failure modes, and the white papers I've written specifically address each of these failure modes. For example, poor governance, that's a major problem in the industry. Vendor overpromising. The reason vendor overpromising happens is because there's so much overcapacity in this industry. If you look at all the capacity in outsourcers globally, the capacity to deliver contact center, service desk, desktop support, field services, or any other IT related or customer service related outsourcing is about double what the demand is. So naturally, outsourcers are very competitive on price. They're very aggressive on the promises they make. And unfortunately, failure mode number one, listed right at the top of this page, is that vendors oftentimes overpromise and fail to deliver on their commitments. The reason is that there's just so much competition in this industry and there's so much overcapacity in this industry. So if you're interested, you can go to this URL that you see right here at the bottom, and you can download any one of those 11 white papers, or all 11 of those white papers, if you want to come up to speed very quickly and understand how to avoid a bad situation in outsourcing, or how to rehabilitate an existing outsourcing relationship. Now, there's a workflow associated with successful outsourcing, whether you've never done it before, or you've done it before and you're recompeting, or you're simply trying to rehabilitate an existing business relationship. The 5 fundamental steps in going about this are to start with a feasibility assessment. Is outsourcing even feasible for you? And that's what we covered in last month's webcast. So if you want the answer to that question, I would encourage you to go to our website, click webcasts, and you will find a recording of the webcast I did last month on the feasibility assessment for outsourcing. It looks at the economic feasibility as well as whether or not you're likely to get better performance from an outsourcer. And it relies very heavily on benchmarks, and specifically the top quartile performers in the MSP space, managed service provider space. But it starts with a feasibility assessment. If you ignore that, you may be going into a possible outsourcing relationship that is completely unnecessary. If your service desk, your contact center, your desktop support or field services is already performing well, or if it can be rehabilitated and you can do so at a lower cost with less risk and better performance than you would get from an MSP, a managed service provider, then there's not a real good business case for outsourcing. So the first question is, does it even make sense to outsource? That's the first part of the workflow, and that's what we covered in our webcast last month. What we'll be covering today is the development and distribution of the RFP. I'm not sure about that choice of colors. It's Halloween was a few months ago, so for whatever reason, I chose orange and black. But this is what we're going to cover today, the RFP development and distribution. The further steps in the workflow are proposal review. That is, the vendors submit proposals, you review them, you score them, you select the vendor. Once you've selected the vendor, there's a whole contract development and negotiation process. And after that, there's a vendor onboarding and vendor management process once the vendor's up and going. But this workflow is very helpful to think of as you move forward. Once again, whether you're new to outsourcing, whether you're thinking about recompeting an existing project, expanding an existing project, whatever the case might be, if there's an MSP or an outsourcer involved, this workflow is something that should be top of mind for you. Once again, today we're going to cover the second step in this workflow, which is the RFP development and distribution. Now, it's probably obvious, or maybe it's not so obvious, that developing an effective RFP is foundational to a successful outsourcing relationship. The quality of the RFP is going to set the tone for the quality of the vendor responses you get, meaning the proposals you receive. It's foundational to the discipline in the process. Too many of these procurement processes end up being hijacked by the outsourcers themselves, which is an ironic twist of fate. You never want the outsourcers running this process. You, as the client, and I'm specifically speaking from the client perspective right now, need to maintain control over this process. And the first step in ensuring the success of an outsourcing relationship is a strong and effective RFP. You can't skip that step. It is crucial. And if you do a good job with the RFP, it makes the following steps in the workflow infinitely easier. It will be much easier to review the proposals and down select to 2 or 3 vendors, and ultimately select a single vendor or 2 vendors, as is sometimes the case. Developing the contract and then onboarding the vendor, all of that becomes a lot easier if the RFP is constructed effectively, because the RFP sets the tone for the entire procurement process and also makes clear your expectations of the vendor. So when I say your, I'm talking about organizations that wish to outsource, and you are setting the expectations for the vendors that you will ultimately work with. Now, an effective RFP is going to do a lot of things for you. First of all, it will align you with an effective vendor. It will get you paired up with a vendor that can meet your requirements. That's not always the case. We find organizations that pick the wrong vendor all the time. Now, when I talk about the wrong vendor, I'm talking about vendors that can't meet the requirements spelled out in the RFP, vendors that don't have the right technology stack, vendors that are not committed to continuous improvement, vendors that have little, if any, AI capability. You want to be aligned with a high quality vendor that can meet your requirements. Now, this isn't saying that you have to be with one of the top 5 vendors worldwide. So I'm not going to throw out names here, but you've heard all the names before. There's some in North America. There's a lot in India. There's a lot of them in Europe. So I'm not going to mention names, but you don't necessarily have to pick one of those top 5 vendors or even one of the top 20 vendors. Sometimes regional vendors are your best option. So be aware of the fact that there's hundreds of vendors out there, and an effective RFP will give you the best chance of partnering with a vendor that will lead to a successful business relationship. Aligning expectations. You want your vendor to know exactly what you expect. Some of this is quantifiable. So for example, all the key performance indicators, you're going to establish performance targets for those. You're going to establish service levels. You should also be clear about what you expect in terms of AI. That can be quantified as well. In fact, I'm going to be doing a webcast next week, I believe it is, for Bright Talk on how to measure the effectiveness of AI. So metrics like AI deflection rate. So how many of your inbound contacts or tickets are deflected and handled without agent assistance? What is the customer satisfaction rate for AI resolved tickets? To what extent do you reduce ticket volume through problem management, for example? You want your vendor to understand that they're not just there to pick up phones and answer simple password resets and Microsoft Office and Outlook type questions, you're expecting them to be a lot more proactive than that, to push forward the boundaries on AI, to help you shift left, to help you deflect contacts into lower cost channels, and to effectively measure things that are traditionally not measured very well. So we're all familiar with CSAT, for example, the service levels, first contact resolution rate, metrics like that. But what about the AI metrics? And what about the continuous improvement metrics like shift left, like ticket reduction? These are metrics that need to be spelled out in the RFP. Cost savings, as I mentioned, was one of the primary motivators for outsourcing. And you want to make it clear, if that's what you're expecting from the vendor, which most people are, that you expect significant cost savings above and beyond what you're currently spending. Now, it's not very common. In fact, it's highly unusual for an RFP to contain existing spending levels. What it usually contains is existing headcount and ticket volumes. So you might talk about handling 25,000 tickets per month with a headcount of 100 technicians, for example. But very rarely is detailed cost information shared. That's information the vendor doesn't need to know. Frankly, it's none of their business, and you should have no problem telling the vendor if they ask for something that you believe is proprietary, tell them no. And one of those things, in my opinion, is what your current spend is. You need to know what that is so that you can compare it to whatever the vendor proposes by way of price. But in terms of your internal cost, that is your proprietary information. Any vendor that's reasonably savvy can typically figure out, based on your ticket volume and your head count, what your costs are. So you don't really need to tell them anyway. They can figure it out if they're, like I said, halfway savvy. And then quality of service. If your RFP is well written, and then you follow through with an effective selection, contract negotiation, onboarding, and management, you can expect to see high quality service delivered to your customers. And that's really where the rubber meets the road, are the customers, your internal enterprise customers, your external B2B customers, whomever your customers are. You want them to see and feel the quality of service that they are getting in the contact center, the service desk, desktop support, or field services. So a good RFP has a number of benefits that can't be overlooked. However, there's a lot of failure modes when it comes to RFPs. Most that we see are, the requirements are just too vague. They haven't been quantified or explained in enough detail. Some RFPs focus entirely on cost. We want to see a cost reduction. We're spending $20 a ticket. We want to see that number down to $10 a ticket, for example. You can get that quite easily if you're willing to sacrifice quality. So when you're focused too much on cost, yeah, you'll get what you want, but you're going to sacrifice quality. Some RFPs are too complex. They have too many requirements in them. Some are, not clear on various criteria. For example, if you expect continuous improvement, if you expect AI adoption, if you expect shift left, if you expect problem management, ticket reduction through problem management, you need to be clear about that and quantify it. If you expect ticket reduction of 10% a year for 5 years, be clear about that. If you expect shift left that reduces your ticket volume at desktop support and shifts it left to the service desk or self-help, self-service, or eliminates it through problem management, be clear about that. And don't be shy about quantifying that. And then rushing the process, that's a real common failure mode. Most of our clients that get into a strong vendor relationship will start the procurement process a year or more in some cases before they expect to onboard that vendor. It's not that it takes that long, but if you try and get this done in 90 days, for example, the RFP, of course, can get done in 90 days. But if you look at the entire workflow from the feasibility assessment, the outsourcing feasibility assessment, to the RFP development, to vendor selection, to contract negotiation, to vendor onboarding, if you try and get that done in 90 days, you will fail, 100% certainty. It takes longer than that to get this done right. The RFP can easily be done in 90 days. In fact, we've gotten effective RFPs out the door in literally a couple of weeks. So that part of the process, I won't say you can rush it, but what I will say is that if you need to move fast, you need to be careful about where you move fast. Above all, you don't want to skip steps. You don't want to skip the feasibility assessment. You don't want to skip the RFP and go immediately to just calling vendors and asking them to send you proposals. That is for sure a recipe for disaster. So typically the whole workflow, plan on about a year, maybe 18 months in some cases. Some of our clients start 2 years before a contract is set to expire. And when they want to recompete a piece of business, they might start 2 years before they want to onboard a new vendor. So these are some of the most common failure modes when it comes to an RFP. Now, I will add to this some additional skipping the RFP altogether and just picking up the phone and calling vendors. That still happens, believe it or not. Organizations decide for whatever reason that outsourcing is the thing to do. They bypass the feasibility assessment. They bypass the RFP, and they simply call a bunch of vendors. It's pretty easy to figure out, which, 10 vendors you want to call and say, hey, we're thinking about outsourcing. What can I tell you? Can you send us a proposal? That still happens, and it happens a lot, and 100% of those deals fail. So skipping the feasibility assessment, skipping the RFP, and simply calling vendors, telling them what's going on and asking them to submit a proposal, that relationship is going to fail 100%. Letting purchasing manage the entire process. They of course have to be involved, but to turn the entire process over to procurement is a mistake. You need subject matter expertise when developing these RFPs, and procurement does not have this kind of subject matter expertise. So while procurement does need to be involved in this process, there needs to be a significant involvement from subject matter experts, whether it's in the contact center or the service desk or desktop support. They need to be involved in the process. And it's a combination of the procurement policies, procedures, and expertise, along with the subject matter expertise that will help you build a strong RFP. Another common failure mode is not having a selection process for who receives the RFP. This is something a lot of our clients will ask us. It's like, well, there's 200 vendors that we know of that do this kind of thing. The reality is there's thousands of vendors that do this kind of thing. Everything from mom and pops that work in Pakistan to multinational corporations headquartered in Europe, the United States, or India. There's thousands of outsourcers out there that would gladly take your business regardless of whether or not they are qualified. There needs to be some intelligent process for identifying and deciding who is going to receive the RFP. One of the white papers I've written talks about the specific process of identifying the vendors who are going to receive your RFP. But this is not an insignificant process. If you just randomly come up with some names, I'm sure you can all think of 5 right off the top of your head. I can think of 100 right off the top of my head. And you just kind of shotgun an RFP out there to a lot of vendors that you don't know much about. You're really creating a lot of work for yourself. There needs to be some selection process for why the vendors who get the RFP did in fact receive the RFP. There has to be some business reason why they received the RFP. They're aligned with your goals and objectives. You've worked with them before. They're regional or they're global. They have the technology stack that you like. They're very, good with AI. They're very good with shift left. They're very good with problem, whatever it might be. There needs to be some reason for the vendors who get the RFP. It should never be more than 10. In fact, I think 6 or 7 vendors receiving the RFP is plenty. You don't need more than that. If you're sending your RFP out to more than that, it means that you're not focused enough. Poorly defined service levels and performance targets. Anything that can be quantified should be quantified. It's not good enough, for example, in an RFP to say, well, we want to see shift left, or we want to see contact deflection into lower cost channels, or we want to see AI adoption, or we want to see ticket reduction through problem management. Well, all those are good objectives, but you need to quantify them. If you're expecting a reduction in ticket volume, quantify it. say in the RFP that you expect a 10% reduction on a per capita basis in total ticket volume every year for 5 years. On shift left, you should be very clear about how many tickets or contacts you expect to shift left and from where. What's going to go from desktop to level 1 support? What's going to go from level 1 to self-help, self-service? What's going to go from self-help, self-service to AI, and so on and so forth? You have to quantify these things. Now, proposal template is fairly important. This is you telling the vendor how you want them to respond. If they don't have clear guidelines, then what you're going to get is way too much information. It's going to be very disorganized, and it will be extremely hard to intercompare the proposals you receive. The point of a proposal template is to give the vendors a clear way to respond to your RFP, such that you can intercompare the proposals more easily so that you don't get too much superfluous information, and so that you can manage the workload of evaluating all the proposals. Evaluating a single proposal can take as much as 100 hours because generally the selection process involves multiple individuals. So take a large bank or insurance company or any other corporation that's thinking about outsourcing. Let's say you get 6 proposals and you have 5 individuals internal to the organization that are working on the outsourcing process. If you have those 5 individuals, evaluating and reading a single proposal, it wouldn't be uncommon for them to spend 20 hours on a single proposal. The proposal might go 100 pages or more with attachments, and presumably you have a scoring algorithm or a scoring template. That's part of what we'll talk about next week in the vendor selection, or next month, I should say, in the vendor selection process. But if you don't specify to the vendors how you want them to respond, you're inviting chaos into this whole process. So you have to be really clear about, here's what we expect. We want it organized in the following way. And a good clue as to whether or not a vendor is going to work well with you is how well they follow the proposal template, how well they follow your instructions. Now, this template is going to include not just here are the sections, here's how you organize it, but it will also include limits on the amount of material the vendor submits. If you don't put limits on what they submit, you will get hundreds, if not thousands of pages of nonsense. You have to be really clear. The vast majority of these proposals, by the way, are boilerplate. And if you force a vendor to give you everything in 50 pages or less, which is typically what we advise our clients, there's not a lot of room for boilerplate. And if you get, and by 50 pages, I'm talking about everything from attachments to the core proposal, anything, put it all together. And you even have to specify the font size, because vendors will, in some cases, do anything they can to skirt these rules. They'll put their proposal on both sides of the page. They'll send it to you in 7-point font. They will narrow the margins on the top, bottom, and sides of their proposal. And I'm not being sarcastic here. I'm telling you what actually happens. And so you have to be very explicit about what you expect from these vendors so that you don't get overwhelmed with information, number one. And number two, so that you can accurately intercompare the proposals that you receive. And then extending deadlines and timeframes. It's funny how when an RFP goes out, usually the first thing you get from all the vendors who received it is, yes, we received it, and yes, we're going to respond. Very rarely do you get a negative response like, we received the RFP, but we're not going to respond to it. That does happen occasionally, but not very often. Now, the second thing you typically hear is your deadline for questions is fine, but your deadline for the proposal is too tight. We've got all this other stuff going on. Yeah, they have all sorts of excuses for why they can't get the proposal out on time. But I guarantee if you send out 6 or 7 RFPs, at least 1 or 2 of the recipients of those RFPs are going to tell you that the time frame is too tight. My advice to you is tell them, too bad. If you can't make the deadline, you should drop out. but we're not extending the deadline for you. Extending deadlines and timeframes for the sake of a vendor that can't seem to get things done on time or doesn't want to get things done on time or has some other excuse for why they can't get a proposal to you on time, just be really blunt. You should drop out. Or you meet the deadline or you drop out. That's it. But extending deadlines and timeframes because of holidays, because someone's on vacation, whatever the excuse might be, if one of the first actions on the part of a vendor is to ask for additional time, imagine how they're going to behave if they are to win a contract from you. They'll never get anything done on time, and they will be very difficult to deal with. So these are some other common mistakes that we find in the RFP process. Now, some of the best practices include, and I've already hit on these, so this might appear to be a little bit, I'm pounding the drum a little bit too much, but anything that's ambiguous or vague has to go. Everything needs to be well-defined and quantified. Strategic alignment, what does that mean? Everybody uses that as kind of a catch-all. You want to be aligned with your vendor. But what does that mean? Well, it means that they value the same things you do. If you value an increase in AI resolved tickets, quantify that and make sure the vendor can do that. If you value shift left, if you value problem management and ticket reduction, if you value deflection of contacts into lower cost channels, specify that, quantify that, and make sure the vendor values that as well. If they try and talk you out of it, it tells you that they are not strategically aligned. Accountability, this is one of the biggest failure points in all outsourcing relationships, is that neither side, neither the vendor nor the client is willing to be accountable for results. Ultimately, the vendor needs to be accountable for results, but those results need to be specified in the RFP and ultimately the contract so that the vendor can be held accountable. Earlier, when I talked about the 11 most common failure modes for outsourcing relationships, I talked about how the governance is oftentimes a failure point, and governance ultimately is about accountability. If you don't have proper governance over a contract, the vendor, neither side, neither the vendor nor the customer has proper accountability. So governance can resolve the accountability issues. And the last thing has to do with value, which doesn't mean lowest price. It doesn't mean the highest performance. It means the best performance given the budgetary constraints that you're operating under. Now, a lot of organizations are unaware of this, but as you drive performance higher, let's say we define performance with a handful of metrics like customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate, mean time to resolve, and a handful of other metrics that typically specify the quality of a relationship with a vendor. You can push those, if you demand, for example, a 98% first contact resolution rate, a 95% CSAT, a 90% or a 1 hour mean time to resolve, for example, on a desktop or field services organization, you can get that, but you're going to be paying an awful lot for it. So be careful about what you ask for in the RFP, because if you're specifying your dream list of metrics and you say you want an ASA of 10 seconds and a mean time to resolve of an hour and a 95% AS first contact resolution rate and a 98% CSAT, you can get all that, but you're going to be paying a 200 or 300% premium to get that level of quality. Most organizations don't need that level of quality. So be aware of the fact that cost versus quality is nonlinear. And as quality goes up, cost goes up disproportionately. So be careful about your wish list. I'll have more to say on this in a few minutes when I'm going to talk about how benchmarks need to guide what you ask for in the RFP. Specifically, when you quantify your service levels and your key performance indicators, you should be mindful of the benchmarks. In other words, what does the top quartile look like? And are you asking or demanding something that is not realistic from the vendor's perspective? Now, key elements that need to be considered in the RFP. The right-hand side is an eye chart, but I included it because I'm hoping that many of you will download today's presentation and actually take a closer look at some of the sample text on the right-hand side of this chart. What I will do is quickly go down the left-hand side of this chart. The scope of services has to be clearly defined. If you're talking only about level 1 tech support, be clear about that. If you're talking only about, inbound customer service for, checking and savings accounts at a bank, be clear about that. If you're talking about in-clinic support for a healthcare organization, be clear about that. You have to be really clear about the scope of services. In engineering, we call this a control volume. Control volume specifies what is and is not what is included and what is not included in what you're going to ask the vendor to do. Your technical specifications, that kind of goes without saying. However, this includes not just the tech stack itself. Includes AI, for example. What do you expect in terms of AI technologies? So the normal tech stack would be your ITSM, it would be your telephony system, it would be your remote control system, LogMe and BombGuard, whatever their latest name is. I know they recently changed their name. So it includes that, but it also includes some of the elements of the tech stack that are not as widely known or as well known at this point, including the AI components of the tech stack. What do you expect of the vendor? For example, what does their global infrastructure look like? What does their tech stack look like? Where are their agents located? What experience do they have? So be clear on what you expect that vendor's qualifications to be. Timeline and milestones, I mentioned that a moment ago. What is your timeline for getting a response from the vendors, getting a proposal from the vendors? How quickly would you expect them to come on board if they are selected to work with you? Performance metrics and KPIs, of course, those are always included in an RFP. Penalties and rewards, those are sometimes called debits and credits. A credit would be a financial reward that a vendor receives for exceeding a performance target, whereas a debit would be a financial penalty that is assessed against a vendor when they fail to achieve a performance target. The vast majority of contracts now contain debits, but not credits. And what I mean by that is that when a vendor falls short of hitting a particular performance target or service level, they are financially penalized. Usually there's a cap on that financial penalty. Typically it's in the range of 15 to 20%, meaning that if they fail to meet performance targets on enough metrics, the most they can be penalized in a single month is 15% or 20% of the monthly payment. The flip side, though, which is where the vendor gets a reward for exceeding performance targets, that's largely gone away. And so I would encourage you to be thinking about that if you're writing your own RFP or putting an RFP together, is that the whole idea of the vendor getting a financial incentive for exceeding targets is that started to go away about 5 years ago, and now it's largely gone. And the reason is that there's an asymmetry in vendor performance. If the vendor exceeds your performance targets, it doesn't benefit you a whole lot. Conversely, if they fall short of performance targets, it generally has a significant impact on your operation. So take a situation where your performance target for CSAT is 90%. Let's say the vendor hits 95% in a given month on customer satisfaction. Well, that's great, but how much do you gain by that? Well, not much. Going from 90% to 95% doesn't really benefit you a whole lot. It's a nice to have, but it's not worth paying for. By contrast, if the vendor falls short of that 90% performance, and let's say they hit 85% in a month, that is something that hurts you a lot. So this is the asymmetry I was talking about. So if 90% is the performance target on CSAT, the vendor hits 95%, oh, that's great, pat them on the back, but don't pay them anything extra. If they fall short and they only hit 85%, that hurts you. You feel it, the customers feel it, and they should be penalized for it. So be aware of debits and credits and the fact that vendor credits have largely gone away, but there should be financial disincentives in place when a vendor fails to reach performance targets. Cost structure simply means how are they pricing their services? Do they price it on a per head basis based on your head count? Are they pricing it on a per ticket basis? What are the price breaks? At what point, you typically have price bands where, you get charged a certain amount if your ticket volume is between 20,000 and 22,500. And then there's another price band from 22,500 to 25,000 tickets per month, for example. Vendors overcomplicate this all the time. The cost structure should be something that they can write on a postcard. It should be explainable in 30 seconds or less. Don't play the vendor's game of complex pricing models because you will get burned on that. And when that first monthly invoice comes through, you will be shocked at how much higher that monthly price is than you were expecting it to be. So you need to insist on simplicity in the cost structure. The vendor can't explain it in 30 seconds or less and can't write it down on a postcard. It's too complex. Evaluation criteria. Now we're kind of getting into the next step in the whole outsourcing process, which is I'm going to have a formal segue into our next webcast, which will be on vendor selection. But, the evaluation criteria, needless to say, is a key part of how you do vendor selection. Legal and compliance. This gets into the contractual issues, which is 2 webcasts ahead, 2 months from now. And then risk management and contingencies. This pervades the entire outsourcing process, everything from the RFP to the contract. What risk mitigation is there? What contingencies are there? If the vendor site goes down, what do they have as backup? These are the kinds of things that get addressed in risk management and contingencies. So this page is a pretty good checklist for what you should have in your RFP. Again, I didn't cover the right-hand text. It's a very small font, but for those that are interested, you've got a little bit of a deeper dive over there on the right-hand side. I mentioned earlier that you have to know your benchmarks, and I borrowed this particular slide from last month's webcast. We went through a case study in last month's webcast on an organization that was contemplating outsourcing. And for the 6 metrics shown in the left column here, cost per ticket, CSAT, FCR, speed of answer, job sat, and annual turnover, I show what their current performance was. And then if they were to remain insourced, what does the top quartile performance look like for those that are comparable? This was a North American organization. So if they got their act together internally, top quartile on cost per ticket is about $16. Top quartile on CSAT is about 95%. Top quartile on FCR is about 88%, and so on. So the idea here is that before you just rush off and write an RFP and start talking to vendors, ask yourself whether or not your current state can be improved upon, and if so, how much. Anyone can get to top quartile. And I would stake my reputation on that. We've seen some of the worst performing contact centers, service desks, desktop support organizations achieve top quartile. You can always get to top quartile. Then the question becomes, okay, do you want to do that, or do you still want to outsource? And if you outsource, do you want to go onshore, i.e. more expensive? Do you want to go near shore, less expensive? Or do you want to go offshore? So these are benchmarks, top quartile benchmarks in the right-hand 4 columns that showed for this particular client of ours, what does the top quartile look like if you outsource onshore? What does the top quartile look like if you go to Mexico, near shore? And what does the top quartile look like if you go offshore, either to India or Hungary? So we were able to look at this benchmarking data in order to ascertain what would we get if we stayed onshore and did it internally, insourced. What about if we outsourced onshore? What if we outsourced near shore, or outsourced to India, or outsourced to Hungary? Having these benchmarks, although this is part of the outsourcing feasibility assessment, having these benchmarks helps you specify what you expect from your outsourcers. So for example, if you're expecting your outsourcer to remain onshore, you might tell them that you expect a 91.6% CSAT, an 85.4% FCR, a 42-second ASA, a 71.5% job satisfaction, and a 41.6% annual turnover. In other words, you're expecting them to reach that top quartile. Now, maybe they'll go a step further and say, oh, no, we can get to 92% or 94% CSAT. We can get to 90% FCR. We can get to a 30-second ASA. That's all great as long as it doesn't blow up your costs. That's why we have cost per ticket in the top row there. But these benchmarks inform your RFP so that you don't end up specifying something that is either not aggressive enough, that's bad enough, but too aggressive means you're going to drive your price up. I spoke earlier about, demanding a 95% CSAT, a 90% FCR, a 1 hour mean time to resolve, and some other metrics that are doable, but at a much greater cost. You have to be careful about over specifying this, because you can get anything you want if you're willing to pay enough money for it. So you want to be careful. Go for top quartile, but not the best, because the best is going to cost you a lot, probably more than you're willing to spend. Next month's webcast, and I already kind of started that process when I showed you that table a couple of charts back, when we were talking about evaluation criteria, legal and compliance, risk management, and so on. Those get into contracting and then onboarding and so on. So just so you know what to expect going forward in these webcasts, we've talked about a response template, being very specific about what you expect your vendor to return to you. Scoring rubrics, meaning an evaluation matrix. This happens during vendor selection. Demos happen during vendor down select. Sometimes these are done virtually, sometimes they are done in person, but you have the vendor do their dog and pony show, usually for an hour to 90 minutes, or a 1 hour demo with a 30-minute Q&A typically. Getting cross-functional teams involved, meaning others within IT. It might be a subject matter expert group that works in level 2 IT. It might be a field services group. It might be a networking group. Could be a lot of different organizations, but you want their input. And then, following up with clarifications, meaning that the vendors submit their proposals. You might have some questions for them. This might even be after a down selection where maybe the RFP went to 6 vendors, you down selected 2, and then you've got some follow-up. So this is kind of guiding us or pointing us towards the next couple of webcasts that we will be delivering. Next month's webcast is going to be on vendor selection. The webcast after that is going to be on contract development. So momentarily, I'm going to take some questions, but before I do that, a couple of things. One is that if you'd like to schedule a call with MetricNet, please just click yes, either ASAP. I can call you back this afternoon or next week. If you want to get a call back from MetricNet next week, we'll schedule some time with you. It's 30 minutes. We can talk about anything from today's webcast to your specific sourcing initiative to anything else related to contact centers or IT service and support. There's no selling pressure. We're not going to try and sell you anything. This is just a half hour where you can talk to MetricNet and get a free consultation session. So please click yes if you're interested in that. Also, here's the URL again, in case you want to go to our website and download or take a look at the white papers that I've written. There's 11 of them that talk about the most common failure modes for outsourcing. And it's a useful guide to keep you out of trouble as you move forward with any outsourcing initiative you might be considering. I've mentioned already that we've got some webcasts coming up. Next month, we're going to talk about vendor selection and vendor scoring, specifically the scoring matrix, how you quantify the evaluation of the vendor and the vendor's proposal. We've got the contract, which we'll talk about in April. And then we've got onboarding, which we're going to talk about in May. So we're just finishing up the second webcast in a 5 webcast series on outsourcing success factors. Also, in case you're interested, we're still the only organization that has downloadable service desk and contact center benchmarks on our website. You can download them, put your credit card number in, and get them right away. We also have contact center and service desk headcount calculators. We have balanced scorecard templates for contact centers and service desks. We also have performance target tools. That is, for your contact center or your service desk, what should your performance targets look like? You provide some basic inputs, and what you get out of that performance target calculator is the top quartile performance that you should expect to be able to achieve. We have an ITSM podcast. Just click on this page in the downloadable PDF, or just go to our website and type in podcast. You can listen to some of those podcasts. Once again, there are attachments, including a PDF of today's presentation. If you're interested, please click that button. And then let us know what you think before you exit the webcast today. Let us know what you think of today's webcast, and please provide some commentary if you can. That brings us to our questions. So the first one here is, how long does it typically take to develop an RFP? We're lucky. We're in a good position as an organization with a huge RFP library. Once we understand our clients' requirements, we can get an RFP ready in under a week. Now, our clients will sometimes take up to 6 months to write an RFP. It depends on how they manage the process. If you have too many cooks in the kitchen, that extends the time frame. If you're starting from scratch, that extends the time frame. If procurement is doing it by themselves, you're likely to get a terrible RFP, not because procurement's bad, but because you need subject matter expertise in the development of these RFPs. So how long does it take? Okay, if you do it on your own, you're probably talking about at least a month, but possibly as long as 3 months. If you work with a reputable organization, not a sales pitch for MetricNet, but we typically get these out to our clients once we understand their requirements. And this is important. I have to caveat that by saying that sometimes our clients don't even know what they want. So we have to walk them through this process where we understand what their current state looks like and where they're trying to go with outsourcing. Once we understand that, we can get an RFP ready in under a week. So the short answer is it kind of depends. If you do it yourself and you're doing it from scratch, you'll not only end up with a poor RFP, but it's going to take you a long time to get there. Second question, what are the most critical metrics to ensure accountability without overwhelming the vendor? Yeah, I'm not worried about overwhelming the vendor at all. What I'm worried about is them meeting their contractual obligations and doing so without making a bunch of excuses. So metrics that we look at, they're the obvious ones. I want to know what the CSAT looks like for the past month. I want to know what the agent turnover was the past month. A lot of clients that outsource their service desk or their contact center don't ask for the turnover numbers. That's a mistake. You need to know what the turnover is. You want to know what the first contact resolution rate is. You want to know what the average handle time is. You want to know what the mean time to resolve and the mean time to respond would be for the non-live channels of chat and email or web submitted tickets. And you want to know the mean time to resolve for those tickets that are also not live. So your mean time to respond in the voice channel and the chat channel is kind of the same as ASA, average speed of answer. The mean time to resolve for first contact resolution rate is just your handle time, but for a ticket that is not resolved on first contact or it's not handled live, like an email or a web submitted ticket, your mean time to resolve is a fairly important metric. So that's kind of the short answer, very high level answer. But you want your vendor to be sharing with you what their turnover is, what their MTTR is, both mean time to respond and mean time to resolve, what their first contact resolution rate is. There's a handful of other service levels that you need to know. In fact, in the 11-part white paper series that I wrote, there's one specific white paper that is devoted specifically to the metrics that the vendor should be held accountable for. And so you can get more detail there. Next question, how do you recommend balancing detailed requirements with keeping the RFP concise to encourage more vendor participation? Yeah, I'm not worried about vendor participation. It's pretty easy to get 100 vendors to submit a proposal if that's what you want. So I'm never worried about that. In this process, what I'm worried about is that clients guard and protect their own interests. I'm not worried about, what does the vendor think? Are we asking too much of them? Are we overwhelming them with metrics? Is the RFP too long? I don't care what the vendor thinks. What I'm trying to do is ensure that the client organization that is looking to outsource is protected and ultimately ends up getting a good result. That is, they enter into a partnership with an effective vendor, and both sides end up in that win-win box. So balancing detailed requirements, you really can't be too detailed in the RFP itself. I know one of the failure modes I talked about a little bit earlier said that the RFP becomes overcomplicated. That really refers to getting too far down into the weeds. You don't want to be telling the vendor how to train their people. You don't want to be telling the vendor how to manage their tech stack. You don't want to be telling them how to minimize their turnover. That's their responsibility. But anything on your side of the vendor wall, if you will, what you're expecting the vendor to do, no amount of detail is too much. So I wouldn't worry too much about being too detailed in the RFP. Next question, can you share an example of how to incorporate vendor demos or proofs of concept in the RFP evaluation process? Couple of things here. One is that every RFP should include a section for references. You want the vendor to provide you with references. Now, of course, they're going to provide their best references, so you expect the references you contact to say glowing things about the vendor. So in those calls with the references, you want to tell them, what is the worst thing you can say about this vendor? What don't you like about them? What could you improve? What could they improve on? Now, in terms of proof of concept, this would apply to things like shift left. It would apply to things like AI adoption, deflection of tickets into lower cost channels, this kind of thing. That's not something that you can really demo live. But they should be able to produce data from existing clients that shows and demonstrates that they've been able to help their clients shift left, reduce their ticket volume, deflect contacts into lower cost channels, and achieve significant levels of AI adoption. Now, if you want them to demonstrate, for example, a co-pilot tool that they use, that's fine. They can show you one of their agents talking to a customer and show how the co-pilot, produces text that the agent can use to troubleshoot the customer's ticket. That can be done by Zoom. It can be done in person as well. So in terms of proof of concept, that's really not a problem, but it complicates the logistics on the vendor side, particularly if they have to be present, that is physically present to do this kind of thing. If this is done remotely through Zoom or WebEx or anything else, it's really not that complicated. But if you're going to be doing this kind of stuff on site, it does present a little bit more of a burden for the vendor. Next question, what is the biggest mistake you've seen companies make when drafting RFPs, and how can you avoid it? I would say biggest mistake is just starting from scratch, doing it yourself, or letting procurement handle the whole process. You need to get some expertise involved. And again, this is not a pitch for MetricNet, but it is a recognition of the fact that there are many, many landmines, many failure modes. And if you go it alone, if you go into this environment, it is fraught with, it's a minefield. And you're going to learn a lot of hard lessons. So trying to do it yourself or trying to do it from scratch or letting procurement handle it entirely, those are really big mistakes that can and should be avoided. Let's see. I thought I had a couple more slides here, but maybe not. Okay. And I don't even have a way to back up at this point. Okay, I had a couple more slides, but for some reason they're not popping up. So let me just say thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time. I know your time is valuable, and I hope you found this time very worthwhile, and I hope you found it to be informative. I hope to see you on next month's webcast, where again, we will be talking about vendor selection and proposal evaluation. In the meantime, please reach out to MetricNet if you have any questions. And again, request, on that survey that we ran, just indicate that you'd like MetricNet to reach out to you so that we can schedule a half-hour consultation session. This is Jeff Rumburg, Managing Partner from MetricNet. Thank you again for joining me today. Bye now.